Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today we conclude our massive 8-part deep dive into pop culture in the year 1968. We're up to the fourth quarter now. We still need to talk about television, about the news a little bit, about what the Beach Boys were up to, but we left off with movies. We were up to November 1st. We still need to talk about the releases in November and December of the year. Let's get right to it. There's a lot to cover. On November 6th came the release of the Monkees feature film that nobody went to see, Head. I remember asking my mom about taking me to see it. She said she'd heard it wasn't very good, and anyway, it wasn't a movie that kids would enjoy. She was probably right about that latter part, and as much as I love the movie now, that seems to pretty much have been the attitude in 1968. There was, of course, a companion album, also titled Head, despite containing some great tracks like the Porpoise song written by Goffin and King and As We Go Along written by Carole King and Tony Stern. The album was largely ignored. Somewhere right around this time I heard a rumor at school that somebody had put acid in Peter Tork's swimming pool. As an 8-year-old, the only kind of acid I knew about was in horror movies like The House on Haunted Hill, so I thought, boy, it's a good thing Peter didn't jump in that pool because he would have immediately turned into a skeleton. I'd been a major fan, but with the Monkees no longer on TV each week, I kind of lost track of them after 1968. Over the next couple of years, I remember seeing them on commercials, on the Glenn Campbell Good Time Hour, and on Laugh-In, where I mainly noticed that Peter wasn't in it anymore. I remember hearing Mike's solo hit, Joanne, on the radio in 1970 and learning that he wasn't in the Monkees anymore either. Of course, in 1971, Davy Jones turned up on his own to escort Marcia Brady, the president of his fan club, to the prom on The Brady Bunch. After that, I'd see Mike's albums around and occasionally I'd hear something about one of them, but they largely receded into the past for me for a very long time. The rock group movie that everybody did go and see was released a week later on November 13th. It was called Yellow Submarine. The idea of an animated Beatles film started out as an easy way for the Beatles to complete their 3-picture deal with United Artists. The Beatles contributed a few suggestions and ideas, but apart from a short live cameo at the end, they had little to do with it. The picture turned out much better than most people would have expected, really capturing the colorful spirit of the times. It was a hit, and naturally the Beatles themselves were delighted. On December 11th came the release of the film version of the musical Oliver, which would eventually win the Oscar for Best Picture of 1968. On December 17th we got the release of Candy, another trippy, colorful, nonsensical, psychedelic 60s film. This one didn't have Peter Sellers, but it did star Swedish actress Eva Olin with a dubbed voice, and an all-star cast including Richard Burton, Sugar Ray Robinson, Charles Aznavour, John Huston, James Coburn, Walter Matthau, John Aston, Marlon Brando, who later called it the worst film he ever did, and Ringo Starr in his first film role away from the Beatles. Ringo's performance as Emmanuel the gardener is pretty embarrassing and painful to watch. Though the role is so poorly written, I'm not sure if Brando or Burton could have done much more with it, and it's certainly not the only cringe-worthy performance in the film. If Ringo's inexperience as an actor comes through, I think it's in the fact that a more experienced actor might have refused to play the role as written. Nevertheless, the movie was a big hit. It was the #1 movie for the last week of 1968 and the first 2 weeks of 1969. I have a sneaking suspicion that the draw was the relative novelty of slightly smutty dialogue and moderate amounts of female nudity in a feature film in 1968. On December 26th came the release of Monterey Pop, D.A. Pennebaker's film of the landmark June 1967 festival. Meanwhile, back on television, as the year drew to a close, the top 10 programs on TV were, at #1, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. NBC took on the powerful Monday night lineup on CBS and won. It was on at 8:30 after I Dream of Jeannie. At #2 was Gomer Pyle, USMC, back for a 5th highly rated season on Friday nights. At #3, NBC's Bonanza was regaining ground against CBS's Smothers Brothers show. Bonanza was in its 9th season. At #4, Mayberry RFD, starring Ken Berry and the folks from Mayberry, who were still doing well in Andy Griffith's old-time slot Monday nights after Lucy on CBS. At #5, Family Affair in its 3rd season, still part of the powerful CBS Monday night lineup right after Mayberry RFD. At #6, the Rasputin of television shows, Gunsmoke, still around in its 14th season, still kicking off CBS's Monday night lineup. At number 7, Julia. NBC's new half-hour sitcom about a nurse and single mother was a hit. It was on Tuesday nights and was taking a bite out of Red Skelton's ratings over on CBS. The Dean Martin Show is at number 8, still on Thursday nights at 10 p.m. on NBC. At number 9, Here's Lucy. The Lucy Show ended on September 16, 1968, and was replaced the next week with Here's Lucy in the same Monday night time slot following Gunsmoke. This season, she did drop from 2nd to 9th in the ratings, undoubtedly due to stiff competition from Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. On this new version of the show, Lucy Carmichael became Lucy Carter, Gail Gordon was still her boss, and now they worked at an employment agency. Lucy's real-life kids, Lucy Arnaz and Desi Arnaz Jr., were her kids on the show. I suspect including them was, in part, Lucy's nod to the youth market. At number 10, The Beverly Hillbillies, back in the top 10 in their 7th season, Wednesdays on CBS. Throughout the fall, the Smothers Brothers continued to battle with network censors over political content on their CBS show on Sunday nights. They also aired a number of memorable musical performances. On October 6th, they aired a film of the Beatles performing their #1 hit, Hey Jude. A week later, on the 13th, they aired a film of the Beatles performing Revolution. Both films had originally been made for David Frost's program in the UK. On November 17th, George Harrison made a very brief in-person appearance to voice support for the Smothers Brothers in their continuing battle with network censorship. On December 3rd, Singer Sewing Machines presented Elvis Presley in his first ever television special. It would spawn a number 8 hit album and be widely seen as a comeback for Elvis after years of starring in mostly increasingly inane movies. The best part of the special were the informal In the Round performances with old bandmates Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana, along with Charlie Hodge and Alan Fortas. The special even closed with a socially relevant number, If I Can Dream. Colonel Parker apparently wanted to close the show with I'll Be Home for Christmas. Director Steve Binder pushed for something more meaningful. The song was an unusual choice for Elvis at the time. Nevertheless, it was a song and a performance that felt genuine and worked well for Elvis and went a long way toward helping reinvent him for the new era. If I Can Dream would go to number 12, giving Elvis his biggest hit single in more than 3 years. On Monday, December 9th, NBC presented The Supremes and the Temptations in the TCB special, which would result in a chart-topping album. On December 15th, The Doors appeared on the Smothers Brothers show, performing both sides of their new single, Touch Me and Wild Child. Guitarist Robbie Krieger sported a black eye that he recently received in a fight he and Jim Morrison had had with 3 guys Krieger described as rednecks. The culture wars remained hot as 1968 came to an end. On October 11th, the USA returned to manned space flights with the launch of Apollo 7. Space flights had been halted in January 1967 after a fire had claimed the lives of 3 astronauts training for the launch of Apollo 1. The crew tested Apollo 7 extensively over 11 days in space, splashing down on October 22nd. The 19th Summer Olympic Games took place in Mexico City from October 12th through October 27th. On Tuesday, November 5th, former Vice President Richard M. Nixon narrowly defeated current Vice President Hubert H. Humphrey for the presidency of the United States. The election was so close, a winner couldn't be called until the next day. Third-party candidate George Wallace drew a significant 13.5% of the popular vote. In December, for the first time, a manned spacecraft left Earth orbit and flew to the moon. On Christmas Eve, Apollo 8 orbited the moon, and the crew, Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders, did a live television broadcast in which they read passages from the book of Genesis. At the time, it was the most watched television broadcast ever. Shortly after their return, Anders, Borman, and Lovell were named Time Magazine's Men of the Year. Men reaching the moon that December helped bring a fraught, difficult, often tragic year to an inspiring and hopeful close. As for the Beach Boys, in October and November they continued sessions for their new album. On October 13th, they appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, singing live versions of Do It Again and Good Vibrations over pre-recorded backing tracks. In December, the group toured the UK and Europe. They found a receptive audience and reportedly played to packed houses. Their popularity outside the US would become increasingly important in sustaining them during these lean years of the late 60s and early 70s. On December 2nd, their single Bluebirds Over the Mountain with Never Learn Not to Love was released. It peaked at a disappointing number 61 for 2 weeks beginning on December 28th. It went to number 33 in the UK. And what were the top singles on that last chart of the year on December 28th? At number 1 was I Heard It Through the Grapevine by Marvin Gaye. Gladys Knight and the Pips version had been at its number 2 peak in December 67. A year later, Marvin Gaye had taken it to number 1. Stevie Wonder's For Once in My Life was at its number 2 peak. At number 3 was Diana Ross and the Supremes' Love Child. As discussed last time, it had been number 1 for 2 weeks beginning November 30th. Glenn Campbell's Wichita Lineman was at number 4, another great song written by Jim Webb. It would reach number 3 on January 11th. Stormy by Classics 4 was at its number 5 peak. At number 6 was Abraham, Martin, and John by Dion. At year end, Dion had returned to the top 40 after a 5-year absence with a song dealing with America's recent tragedies. It had been number 4 for 2 weeks beginning December 14th. I'm Gonna Make You Love Me by Diana Ross and the Supremes and the Temptations was at number 7. It would go to number 2 for 2 weeks beginning January 11th. Who's Making Love by Johnny Taylor was at number 8. It had spent 2 weeks at number 5 beginning December 7th. Bobby Vinton's I Love How You Love Me was at its number 9 peak, and at number 10 was Cloud 9 by the Temptations, which would be number 6 the next week, January 4th, for 2 weeks. As for the top albums at year end, the Beatles' new self-titled double album was in its first week at number 1. It would remain there for 9 of the next 10 weeks. At number 2 was Glenn Campbell's Wichita Lineman album. It would hit number 1 for 3 weeks in March of 1969. At number 3 was Cheap Thrills by Big Brother and the Holding Company, one of 5 albums still in the top 10 from the beginning of the quarter. At number 4 was The Second by Steppenwolf, following up their number 6 debut hit album. This would go to number 3 the next week, January 4th. At number 5, Judy Collins' Wildflowers album. The album had been released back in '67 and was finally high on the charts based on the hit single Both Sides Now by an interesting new young songwriter named Joni Mitchell. The album was at its number 5 peak. At number 6 was Electric Ladyland by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. As discussed last time, this went to number 1 for 2 weeks in November. At number 7 was Feliciano by Jose Feliciano. At number 8, Iron Butterfly's Inagata de Vida. At number 9, Glenn Campbell's Gentle on My Mind album. And at number 10, Timepiece, The Best of the Rascals. These last 4 albums had all been in the top 10 at the beginning of the quarter, and we talked about their chart performances there. And this, amazingly, finally, I think, brings us to the end of 1968. Thanks so much for sticking with me through this very, very deep dive. I hope you found it interesting. If you remember those days, I hope this rang true. If you don't remember those days, I hope you found it interesting to see kind of what you'd missed and how these things all sort of came together back in the day. I really look forward to your comments. Next time, we'll go someplace completely different for some other Beach Boy related topic. Meanwhile, have a great week. Thanks again for watching. Please hit like and subscribe. Always appreciate it if you do that. And we will see you next time. Thanks. Bye.